I am going to, let's see here.
All right.
And then that doesn't let me share. All right, I'm going to do share in Teams and see kind of a disaster I can make here. Okay. All right. Kevin, I'm going to ask you to keep an eye on the chat if there's questions.
Yeah, we'll do.
So let me start here with the introduction. So this is all about getting to know your Power BI tenant. If you give me a moment, that'll make life a lot easier. Let me mute my conversations here because I have a couple people pinging me, and you're going to have to keep hearing a ping constantly. All right, so this presentation, I'm going to apologize up front. So I do intend to deliver this several more times. This is the first time I've delivered it. I had a miserable week at work and last week, so I did not get a chance to time it out. So I'm hoping we have enough content to go 50 minutes. And if we go too far, I certainly could take questions offline or something. I don't think we're going to run too long, but I don't know because I didn't time it out. I've done a lot of work with interacting with these admin REST APIs and auditing customers and environments and stuff like that. So that's what we're going to talk through. And I put on my intro slide here, Szepesi. That's how you pronounce my last name. I do work at 3Cloud Solutions along with Corey. So that's why you see the 3Cloud stuff here. I do tend to like my slides to be a little better as far as like images and stuff. These are pretty stale, so hopefully I can talk my way through it. Just a quick introduction. So I'm a senior architect at 3Cloud. I'm in the managed data section. I was explaining to Kevin, that's kind of like, you just think of it as consulting, like a subscription consulting base, as opposed to going in and doing project work. We have subscriptions with customers. They get a set amount of hours, and then we're just kind of available to consult. I focus mostly on Power BI and, wow, my space bar isn't working. So I've been in IT 25 years, but all of that pretty much in support and consulting roles. Even when I did some C# development, it still was for a support organization. So never really pure developer type stuff. Started out IIS and Windows Server, went to Microsoft and supported SharePoint there forever, and then meandered my way into Power BI and Microsoft BI technologies. Development experience in SQL. Power BI, I put model and visuals. There is nobody on my team that will come to me to ask for assistance with making a visual look good. I'm not the visual guy. I really like just plain tables and all this kind of stuff. I'm always more fascinated, and have always been with every technology, with the behind the scenes stuff. So in Power BI, that means the model, that means performance, that means the API, all that kind of stuff. I bashed my way around PowerShell, bashed my way around C#. That was 20 years ago. I used to do that. And I guess I'm just going to have to give up and learn Python. I am starting to do that. Really don't want to, but here we are. I live in Winsboro in East Texas. So Winsboro has 4 stoplights, 3,500 people, and I live outside of that town. So yeah, I'm out in the middle of nowhere, probably about 2 hours east of the DFW area. So I'm not exactly close. Like to fish, play guitar, started lifting weights again. And I don't know, the past couple of years, I've just gotten fascinated and wrapped into English Premier League soccer. So that's me. And then just for a laugh, I'm 6'6", 370 pounds. And I have 2 Shih Tzus that weigh a total of 20 pounds. I was at the vet the other day, and I said, hey, I'm going to go out and get my dogs. And I walked back in, and this lady that started laughing there, she's like, that is not the dogs I expected you to walk in with, these little tiny dogs. I think she expected me to have like pit bulls under each arm or something, but so that's me.
I got that picture in my mind, and yes,
Yeah,
it is.
You can imagine, very comical, right? These tiny little dogs. Yeah. All right. So let's get all into it. I will say this. I kind of briefly said it. If you have questions, raise your hand and let Kevin catch them. Kevin, just hit me up if you think it makes sense to do it at the point of while we're doing this, or we can table them to the end. But here's just a broad swipe, right? We're going to talk about what is a REST API, because honestly, when I started doing this presentation, I didn't know what REST stood for, and I didn't technically know what makes a REST API versus an API or something. So for, nerd credit points at your next cocktail party, we're going to talk about what REST stands for. We're going to talk about PowerShell, just briefly explain what it is if you don't have experience. If I was better at Teams and could do polls, I would have done a poll to figure out how many of you actually use PowerShell, but I'll just kind of blow through that. And then when we get into the demos, I'm going to go into those a lot more, kind of like line by line talking through it. Not going to teach you the language, but at least talk you through the scripts that I'm using. And the scripts that we're going to use, we're going to be gathering, Power BI Tenant information, and I typically call that, audit data, if I slip and say audit data. And then we're also going to look at the Power BI activity logs, what they are, how to gather them, what kind of information is in them. So Elaine, who we were talking about before, gave me this idea for a slide. She said, you know what, you really should start this presentation and try to convince people why they should care, right? Well, you're here, so you must care in some aspect, but really, who is doing what and when in your Power BI tenant, right? We don't have the best tools for that. Now, some of that's changing. And once we can officially talk about that, and it hits public preview, I'll come back and talk about that too. But for right now, if I'm trying to track what's going on in my environment, who's doing what at what time, who's viewing, editing, creating, deleting, all that kind of stuff, there's no easy way to do that. And so interacting with these APIs that we're going to talk through is one way you can get this information. Either really it's, as it's happened, it's on a 30-day rolling. We'll go through all that. And then the audit information is what is out there in your tenant. Honestly, it's very strange. When I started supporting SharePoint, it was on-prem, and SharePoint would get into an environment, somebody would put it on a machine under their desk, and then like 6 months later, the CEO is running mission critical report or has mission critical data in there, and so he turns their machine off and everybody freaks out. SharePoint grew like a virus, and I'm guessing, being Power BI professionals, you've seen the same thing with either your customers or your environment, however you interact with Power BI. It can absolutely sprawl out of control, and suddenly you just have an absolute mess on your hands. So we're going to talk through how we can use this API to kind of gather some of that data and get a sense of what's out there. Again, governance could be used for governance as well. I have a customer that's doing that. All right, and if this interests somebody, this change over time thing, I can talk about this at the end. I say pro mode because we're just going to be grabbing snapshots of data. But if you think about it, you could set this up to pull this data every day and save it in a database and report against it. And so one of my customers is really doing some interesting stuff about, okay, 6 months ago, we had 10 workspaces in, 25 data sets, and now we have 50 workspaces and 300 data sets, so that concept of how is the tenant growing over time, they can show that and talk about, hey, look how much we're growing the business and how much we're doing with our Power BI environment, how many people are using it, et cetera, et cetera. Right, so we can talk about that at the end. I don't formally have that in there, but I can kind of do that on the fly. So before we get into the details, any questions? Are you going to cover this? Do you want to cover this? Do you need to be an admin on my tenant? That's yes. Yes, you do, unless you use a service principal. And we'll get into that as well. When I do this for my customers, all the customers that I've done it for, that's the first thing I do is say, hey, I've got these PowerShell scripts. I want to run them in your environment, but they access the admin API. So I'd like a Power BI administrator to run these scripts. And then when the Power BI administrator runs the scripts, then we get all the information we need. Technically, you can use what's called a service principal to do it, but that has its own challenges as well. But yes, that is one unfortunate part. Now, how I've dealt with that is, we go through the process of like, we'll get on a meeting and like, I'll have the Power BI admin run the stuff, and then we'll take the files and put them into Power BI. Good question. I didn't know if there were any others that flew by.
I didn't see any others.
Good deal. All right, let's get into it. So REST APIs, right? So representational state transfer application programming interface. I mean, I had no idea that's what all that, and truly that really doesn't even help me knowing that. So the key thing is this application programming interface, right? So if you want to be pedantic, if you live out on Stack Overflow and love trashing people and all that kind of stuff, technically, an API is a set of rules or a contract or instructions about how two applications or services can interact with each other. I say pedantic because you will see, and I will do it in this presentation, where an API is used to, the term API is used to mean the web services, the data that comes back and forth. If you really want to be pedantic, it's the write-up, right? So I just recently bought a Roomba, a new Roomba, as opposed to the older one I had. And so I need to learn how to use it, right? So I need to know how to plug it in, how to turn it on, what button to push, how the app, so the Roomba will do what it's supposed to do, right? And so it's that sense of a defined contract. I present this to you, you're going to give me this information back. Now, you may hear the term RESTful API, right? So the API is the set of rules. RESTful API, it's kind of difficult getting a full explanation of it too, but there's a particular set of rules that make an API a RESTful API. I don't care about the whole rule set. The two that really matter in our situation is that it's a client-server-based communication and it's stateless. And so stateless means that I send an instruction, it sends me stuff back, right? There's no like back and forth. And then later in my presentation, you're going to call me out on that, but there's no back and forth as far as like, I send you this, and then I send you another, and then I send you another, and then you send me back. It's really this, it's fully, you can see it's like web enabled type stuff, right? Because I'm just sending a request and back comes my response. That's what makes it a RESTful API. Why do we care again? Because we're going to be talking about the Power BI REST API. And so technically, if I'm going to be pedantic, again, it's instructions on how to access these web services, or how to web services. Nice typo there. So how to access these web services in the Power BI tenant to get information back, to get metadata back. So the four areas they talk about for doing embedding, administration, governance, and user resources. Results may vary based on your access within the tenant. We're going to talk about that on the next slide too. In fact, I'm going to jump to that. This, if you can see it okay, hang on, let me drop that down. So these are all the groups of the particular APIs. So the admin one is what we're going to be talking about here, but there's all these other operation groups. All these other ones, if you call them, it's going to be, they used to call it SharePoint security trimmed. I don't know if that term applies to everything now, but if you call the dashboards API, for instance, you're going to get back dashboards or information about dashboards that you have access to. Whereas an admin calling this read-only admin API will get back all of the dashboards. Again, I want to be specific. It's metadata about the dashboard, not the data itself, not the data included in, but the metadata, the name of it, when it was created, who created it, that kind of stuff. Any questions here? straightforward.
Yep, pretty straightforward.
All right.
Now, also, I think, isn't there some of those that you can call when you're not an admin and you could see your stuff, I think.
Oh yeah, well that's what I mean. Everything, so the admin one is where you're going to need to be a Power BI admin or use that service principal that's given rights to do that. All of the rest of these, anybody can call that has an account in Power BI. It's just what you get back is going to be what you have access to,
Okay.
right? So you'll
Maybe
get
that was
back.
what you said before and it didn't flip in my brain correctly.
No, that's fine. That's cool to call it out for sure. All right, so just want to give another second for questions because we're going to just talk briefly about PowerShell. What is PowerShell? I'm old enough to know when it came out, so I can talk to some of this, right? So this is a scripting language that Microsoft developed. There was VBScript before, but I think the intent here was to try to put a language out that administrators could easily use to do automation and complex things like that, right? So configuration management, task automation. VBScript was not the most user-friendly, right? So PowerShell is this attempt to like, hey, we want administrators and server operators to be able to do this stuff with a language, but we know that that audience doesn't necessarily have a development background. So out comes PowerShell, right? So it really was built with administrators in mind. It is a command line shell. So typically I'm going to be using an IDE when I get into it, but you can run it from the command line. And the administrators in mind part is these commandlets. This is the coolest part of using PowerShell. They are, you can just think of it as just all this complicated code wrapped up in a single command, right? So connect Power BI service account. I don't have to do all this like crazy code to connect. I just call that and it runs in the background and authenticates me. They're always in this verb noun pair, right? Get and then a command or, connect Power BI service account, verb noun, right? Get Power BI activity. And it's usually like get or set or whatever, that kind of stuff. So this is PowerShell. And really, again, I'm going to be doing demos where I'm crawling through a couple scripts. Once I pull my file location out of the script, not that it's secret or anything, but I'll just make a generic or something. I will provide those scripts if you're interested. I guess Kevin, I can get those to you along with this deck, so you can go play around with it after this if you have not before.
Yeah, that'd be great.
All right, so I did throw some extra links inside the deck as well. This is just Microsoft Learn content, right? And then here's the GitHub link for PowerShell. But because every presentation now has to have something about ChatGPT, so we can be all cool and hip. This text that I wrote right here, I went onto ChatGPT and I said, write PowerShell to connect to a Power BI tenant and list out the activities of the last 30 days. ChatGPT spat out exactly the script that you would need. No changes needed. Run it from PowerShell. So it's a reminder that ChatGPT lets people have all sorts of interesting opinions about it, but it's helping me as I'm struggling through some Python stuff too, right? Because just ask it, how do I do this in Python? And it's pretty good what comes out of it. Yeah, it's not stupid proof. You still have to know something, but this command is stupid proof. It will spit out the exact one. I was very impressed. Any questions about PowerShell? Righteous. All right, so let's get into the activity log. What is it? So if you read documentation, there are actually two log sources out there that you can use to get information about your Power BI tenant. One of them is this unified audit log that I think is up at like the Microsoft 365 layer, because it's got SharePoint, Exchange, Dynamics, Power BI. It's got all sorts of stuff in it, right? I'm gonna punk out of that one. This is just not in scope, right? I didn't look at that. That usually takes even more permissions to get to and weed your way through that. We're just gonna be looking at the Power BI activity log. And What it is just in your tenant, there is this activity log that tracks all user activity in the tenant. It's a rolling 30-day log. So it's just, I got 30 days of data. The next day comes, it just slides forward one. But it's really kind of interesting, full data that it tracks. So if you're looking to understand how people are using your environment or audit or figure out who the heck it was that deleted a report they shouldn't have, that's where you want to go. This is the, and I probably should have put a little bit more into this, I guess, but when you call a REST API, this is kind of the string that you pass when you're passing into, and this is kind of standard here for the admin. Let me see if I can get fancy here for a second, or I might just blow it up. Oh boy. Whoa, look at that. So this here, up to this part here, that's kind of the same. And then you'd have your verbs at the end here, activity events.
Are you Dan, are you annotating this screen?
Yeah, is it not showing? Oh, you know what? It's just showing on mine. Hang on. Maybe I can do it here. Ooh,
That's
boy.
it. Yep.
That's some drunken sailor outlining there. Good grief. That's why I'm not a digital artist. Okay, so this is always the same, this api.powerbi.com version 1.0 my org. And then I mentioned we were in the admin group, so that's admin there. And then this activity events is what we're going to call. Again, I'm going to show you how this looks in the script. I don't really want to go too much more into that other than to just so you're familiar with it when you see it inside of the script. So I'm going to jump from here into the demo, which means I need to stop sharing and switch over. But any questions on the slides up to this point?
Still looking good.
So I'm going to jump over to here, and hopefully y'all can see, if I'm sharing the right one, the Windows PowerShell ISE. Yes?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, and I'm actually going to put some breakpoints in here, and we're going to kind of step through this. This is actually the really easy one, right? Which is why, looking at my time, I'm kind of hemming and hawing how I'm doing on time, because this one's really straightforward. First of all, just a little bit of getting yourself used to what you're seeing here. This pound sign, that's making that just commenting out that line, right? So I have some instructions built into here so you can read it. This is a commandlet, connect Power BI service account. In these scripts, I've left it just like this. There's all sorts of commands you can send to it. But the reason I've done that is that I'm going to put a breakpoint right there. I'm going to try to put a break. There we go. And you're going to see right away, I get a pop-up for authentication here. When you pass this commandlet in like that, this is what you're going to get. Now, obviously, this is not going to work for automation or something like that. But for this kind of thing where I'm just pulling this data, it works great. I'm going to use this partners site that I have access to, and I'm going to authenticate. And so at this point, I'm authenticated and it knows what tenant I'm going to, right? You can see that the tenant ID is here based on who I logged in. And so as we walk down through this, anytime you see a $sign, that's a variable, right? So this first setting, I'm just setting how many days I want to extract. Typically I do 30. For a demo, I'm just doing 5 because I don't want to wait for 30 files to be created. I'm going to put a breakpoint here. And if you're wondering, that's F9 in this to do that. And I'm going to run all the way down to there once I figure out how to do that. Here we go. All right, so I've hit this second breakpoint, right? So if I want to look at those variable values and see what they are, right? So that says I've set that to 5. Export file location. For once, I gave things good variable names. So you can probably guess that's where it's going to write the files to. And then we've got yesterday UTC. That's just giving yesterday's dates. Because I'm in the middle of a day right now, I just want to start with yesterday, right? I don't want to get like half a day and have to worry about, is that being collected in UTC or my time and do conversions and all that kind of stuff. I'm generally pretty lazy, so I'm just going to set it to start with the day before. And then this date time file written, big humongous thing here. This is the date time, that we're actually you see it's 5/2/2023. And then what is that? 23/27. I think that's UTC. So these are just, I'm setting all these variables that I'm going to use. Now, once we get down to here, I've preset these variables, and now I'm going to say, okay, look, I'm going to start looping through for each day and running this command to get the activities for that day. So that's what, in a sense, what this is doing here. Start on day one, set the variables, set the file name string here, and then we're going to go down to here and call that. So hang on a second. Yeah, this is the one that doesn't have it. Okay, so let's go to there. So now I've set up these other variables. Again, I'm just setting labels and things like that, right? I need to pick a file name. I'm gonna call it all activity events and put the date in it and the time and all that kind of stuff. Because I'm gonna be writing these files out. I want to make sure each file name is different. And then we get into here, and for this activity event, there is this cool get Power BI activity event commandlet in PowerShell that wraps up all the API calls. And so if that's what this step is doing here, and that writes out the file and it writes something to the screen to tell me it's doing it, right? So if I tell it to continue, it's going to say, let me just clear all, because it's hitting that one up there too. Move all breakpoints, and I'll just let it run to the end. And as it goes through and gets each day's activity, it's just going to tell me that it got it, right? So there's day one, day two, et cetera, et cetera. So if I jump to here, and let me get rid of these. This is, I was just testing before I came on here. Now, I will say, I had to use an environment that I have Power BI admin in, right? So I'm using this partner thing. I think they're really close to shutting it down. So the permissions aren't necessarily where they need to be. So the information coming back is not going to be the best. But you can get a sense of it, right? So this first one here, there was this export activity events. There's usually like some sort of, I didn't really do too much in there, I guess. So we'll just stick with that one. But you've got a user key here, user ID, a client IP. Interesting, it's coming up as all zeros. And then, request ID, when it started, activity ID, did it succeed, et cetera, et cetera. Now, it doesn't tell you how long it took to do this event, unfortunately. They keep teasing that maybe they'll put that in someday, but as of now, they don't. Trying to see if there's anything else in here. Here's get groups as admin. So this is me probably playing around, pulling out workspaces or something like that. So this is the kind of data that comes back. It's a JSON object. And that's that, right? So this one's pretty straightforward, right? If you were going to take this script and play with it in your environment, again, as pointed out, you need to be a Power BI admin or have a Power BI admin run it. You would get into PowerShell and run this script. You might get an error, and there are some preliminary files that you have to install to run the Power BI applets. And you would just kick this off, and boom, it's going to dump these files out. And these being JSON files, if we have time, these can be loaded straight into Power BI, combined and loaded in, and reported against pretty quickly. There's a JSON connector inside of Power BI Desktop. So that's activity events, and you can see it's going back 5 days, right? 5/1, 4/30, 4/29, 4/28, 4/27. Not cool data in there. I apologize. But any questions here? Because if not, I'm going to jump back into the slides. And then we'll talk about the audit script. And yes, again, I will share this. No questions. All license level, yes. You can use this in a pro or premium environment. All right.
Good old Diamond always
Here.
has questions, and he's welcome to come off mute and ask them.
I'm just trying to be. I do have a follow-up, but you keep going with your presentation.
All right. Well, I'm going to try to do this again, and it's going to make me start all over again. Let's go down to here. All right. So that's pretty straightforward. You can ask your question if you want. If it makes more sense to ask it now.
It really is more generally about what things you can do with this versus I guess it is related to it because there was something this again, I got to go to Kevin if he remembers better than me, trying to get like information about RLS on a data set. And it turned out, that's why I asked my question. It turned out that you needed to have a premium license to be able to, and I don't know, Kevin, if you remember, it was something related to the security settings on the data set. So does that, Dan, sound to you like anything? Does that sound familiar at all? Like to get certain kinds of that kind of information, which is not activity information. It's really about the data.
It's a great
right, the data
segue
model.
to this slide right here.
Oh,
So what I was just showing was activity, right? So just straight up what people are doing in your environment, and if it was a better environment, you'd see all sorts of stuff, right? Created, published, read, all that kind of, there's a whole list of that stuff. What we're going to talk about now is the audit data for your tenant. And yes, that's what it would be. I always think of crawling the tenant. Again, it's a SharePoint throwback when we would crawl data to index it and search it and that kind of stuff. If you think in terms of a developer, you can think of an object model of an entire tenant. But what we're essentially going to do in this script is we are going to audit the entire thing and pull back all the metadata for the tenant and things like RLS settings, whether it's enabled or not. That's the kind of metadata we're talking about. And I'm going to show you the settings that there's kind of like multiple layers that you can pull back, whether you want all the way down to DAX, expressions, and Power Query, or if you just want like the major artifacts, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Basically, what we're going to get back is the Power BI tenant in JSON format, right? And again, if we have time, I'll try to walk through loading some of those into Power BI and show you what that looks like. You will also hear this referred to as the scanner API, right? And so from the documentation, as it says, it's a set of admin APIs to catalog metadata of your Power BI tenant, right? So there are multiple ones of these you can call. Just in the next couple slides, when we go through kind of some stuff that I won't expect you to remember, but you'll have in this deck to refer to, or maybe just to remember to go search documentation. We talk about major artifacts: workspace, dataset, data flow, report, and then there's this sub artifact metadata. And so this becomes the real nitty gritty: table names, column names, the DAXs of the measure, the N0. That is, why do you see typos once you're presenting? And Power Query for your tables, right? So the actual mashup Power Query for your tables, you can pull this out of the metadata. In this next slide, you're going to see that referred to as a sub artifact metadata. Now, can you see this and can you read the text? Because it's kind of hard in this delivering Teams to see how big this is.
Yeah,
If not,
the text part is really small.
Like I can, ugh, it looks really crappy, doesn't it? Let's do this. Impromptu demo. Let me just actually load up that environment because I want to make sure you can see the text of those. So Let's see here. Admin portal. Oof. I'm going to get into that environment and I'm going to load that up. And that was impossible to read. Almost there. Okay. So I am in the admin portal. And if I go down to, come on, there we are. There's this admin API. These are the three that I wanted to talk through. Okay, so this first one, I'm going to address it first because it's here, right? If you remember in the script, I called that connect Power BI service account. It popped up a login and I could log in, right? There is this concept of a service principal in Azure Active Directory that is basically like a service account. You know, it's not really an account, and you can be very precise with the permissions you can assign it. So if you don't want to use a Power BI admin, you can have somebody create a service principal for you and give it access to these admin APIs in this setting here, right? So what this says is, I have this turned on, so service principals that are in these security groups can call those read-only admin APIs. All right, that's what this first box here. This second one here, I always tell everybody to turn these on. I'm not sure why you would want them off. So this is the first step of getting those sub-metadata artifacts, sub-metadata, remember which that was. So if you want to get data set tables and columns, for instance, right, you turn this on and, you know, for the entire org. And then the final one here is if you want to get DAX and mashup expressions, i.e. Power Query back, you turn that on as well. So when I go to do this for a customer, and often I'll do this kind of audit with a new customer if I'm trying to learn their environment or understand it, I always have them turn these on so I get all of that metadata out. If they're not turned on, you will get the major artifacts, but you won't get much more than that. So again, this one, I just explained it because it was here, not really in scope, I guess, for this, but it's this detailed metadata and then DAX and mashup expressions. All right, how quickly can we pivot back? Right. So, wow, I went to the end. I'm gonna get seasick watching me here. Hey, down goes to the end. Don't hit the down button. Okay, I think we went through all of that. Let me just make sure. Yep. And then we were here, and this one we can't see. And then we're here. So this is one of those slides that I just took a bunch of this detail out here and threw it in here. But there is some good stuff here, right? So the first question everybody always asks is, well, is this going to like slow my farm down when I do this, my tenant? You know, if I do this audit, is everything going to come to a crash because I'm gathering all this information? They do this against cached objects somehow, and it has something to do with when an item is being refreshed or republished, they cache it, and then they do the auditing against that cached object. I don't know that for certain, but that's what the documentation says. It's going against cached objects, so it should not affect performance. Because of that, if you have a data set up there that's never been refreshed, it may not have that sub artifact information available. You may have that turned on in the admin portal, but it just may not work. Right? It may not show up. Same thing with direct query data sets. If they've never been used, they won't have sub artifact data. So I read that as once you start using it, it will show up. Again, I don't have personal experience with that. That's pulled out of the documentation. And then, so these are all kind of dropped in here. Real-time data sets with object level security, not row level. Live connection data sets. There's going to be limited sub artifact information available for those. And it's just kind of a generic thing. If you're missing data, that's probably why. Right. And then this is the kicker here. I didn't even know this. If you have a data set larger than a gig in shared workspaces, you're not going to sub artifact data. It's always cool to do a presentation on something you think you know, find something you didn't. That kind of sucks actually, but it is what it is. So
Do you think that's because of the limit size in a shared data set, or
could be,
or a shared workspace maybe?
could be. Throw an extra couple links up here, just more geekery on this kind of stuff, right? The two main articles on metadata scanning and setting up metadata scanning. Let's go here. So I tried this kind of animated visual pseudocode way of presenting how this works, because it's a lot more moving parts than just call something and off we go, right? So we'll see how this goes. On my left is the client, on the right is the Power BI service. The client you can think of as PowerShell, right? So the client says, hey, here's who I am. That's the authentication part. Please give me a list of all your workspaces, right? Power BI service says, hey, here you go. Here's all 700 of them, whatever, right? It's going to return the workspace IDs. Now, this technology, when it's doing the scanning in the service, can only work on 100 workspaces at a time. So you'll see when we get into the code that we have to batch this into 100 IDs when we do this, right? So I'm the client, and now say, okay, hey, take these 100 workspaces, give me all of this detail here. Now this is me, because in my script, I've got all of these turned on. This is like everything, right? Give me all this information. Power BI services says, I got your request. Here's your confirmation number. Gives me a scan ID, right? So in the script, I now have to store that scan ID because it's going to go off and do it kind of while I'm doing everything else, right? It's just off in the background doing that. I then am going to give it the next 100, right? I said 700, right? So it's going to do this 7 times over and over, you know, and just until I stop asking. And in the script, I basically would have to loop that 7 times. Here's the first 100, here's the second 100, here's the third 100, and I get a scan ID for each one of those, and I have to store that scan ID with, you know, the particular batch. When I'm done that, I always think of Bart Simpson when there was an episode where the Simpsons were going to a water park, and the kids kept asking, "Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet?" You guys may have had that in a vacation or something, but that's what I'm doing in the code here. Now, basically, I'm taking that scan ID and I'm going to the servers and say, hey, is this one done? I start with the first one. Is it done? Nope. I wait 10 seconds, ask it again. Is it done? Yes. Okay. I go to my second one. Are you done this one? Right. So you can see, again, this is another loop we get in here. And I'm going to do all this until all the scans are complete. Power BI service has scanned all 700 items. And now I'm going to take that scan ID and I'm going to send it back to the service and say, okay, for that first 100, here's the scan ID. Give me the results of that scan. And the Power BI service goes, sure. Here's your big gnarly blob of JSON. And then I will repeat that over and over again for all the particular pieces. So is this helpful? Any questions here? Because once we get into the code, it probably gets even harder to follow. So I wanted to make sure, just conceptually, you understand how this is done. We get our list of workspaces, or we tell the Power BI service, give me all the workspaces. We're going to break them up into sets of 100 and request, you know, a scan be done on those 100. And it's going to give us a scan ID for each one. And then when we're done all that, we're going to take those scan IDs. We're going to keep asking, making sure once they're all done, the service tells me they're all done, then I'm going to start requesting the results back. And so then
Yeah.
at the end of it, I'm going to end up with 700 piles of JSON.
You got some thumbs up, so that was
Cool.
I remembered that you can't see that when you're doing the demo.
Actually, they do when you present in
Oh,
Teams,
did
it
it?
shows up. Yeah,
Did
the
it show?
thumbs up.
Good.
Yep. All right, so back to the demo. And so now audit PS1, right? So this is familiar. Same thing. I'm going to authenticate again. And I'm going to do, I guess for time's sake, I'm going to not do the breakpoints and all that kind of stuff. I'm just going to kind of talk through this, right? So this is authenticating. Some of this is just setting up like objects to hold the information. Here's the particular API that I'm going to call. I'm going to call this workspaces/modified. Now, there is an argument to this that once you've done a full scan, Power BI will keep track of what's changed since that initial scan. And then the next time you call it, you can pass an argument that says, hey, only give me the ones that have changed. I just don't feel like dealing with coding around that. So I just call the full thing every time I call it, right? So even though it says modified, if you call modified without anything else, you're going to get the whole spiel. This is the commandlet here. Remember, we didn't have to do this on the other one. It was all wrapped in that get Power BI activities commandlet. Goodness, right? This one, we got to kind of manually do it all. So we're going to invoke the Power BI REST method. We send it this string, which tells us what we're looking for. We're getting that information. And then this is just me doing a couple conversions and stuff to make it easier to handle. So again, we get the full list of workspaces here, then we kick into this loop where we're going to start going through there and we're going to start, saying, here's the first 100. And again, I guess it's a little gnarly from here. We store it in a JSON body, those 100 ones. And I think what I could do, let's do that. F9 and start this thing running. Okay, so I've hit that breakpoint here. If I do this body array, that's my first 100 workspace IDs that I've sent in there, right? And then so we pass in this string and tell it here's our ones, and we store our scan ID, all right? This section here, we're setting up file names and strings and all that kind of stuff. And this is the are we there yet section, right? So we're just going to keep looping and saying, hey, are we succeeded? If not, loop again, etc. Right? So if we come down to here, I apologize for the speed. I just looked at the time though. In this final portion here, this is us calling that final REST API to say, okay, hey, give me the scan results for this particular loop that I'm doing, and I'm going to write them out to a file. So I'm going to go ahead here and say run continue. And I'm going to do that again because I just forgot again. And run continue. And these numbers are the various workspaces it's chewing through. Just have it dumping out, or actually, I think this is each set of 100. So we just did 1,100 workspaces there. And since I've pre-done this, this is what the file looks like. I'm going to open it just for laughs, but you can see it's pretty gnarly. But it has information about, data set ID, what the name of it, the tables. I don't have access to it for that one. Could be it's not turned on or something. Again, this is kind of a bummer workspace here. But when that's done, you'll get this single JSON file that, again, you can open that in Power BI. So let me show you a couple reports. real quick. Again, nothing crazy on this because especially the activity log doesn't work too well. The data that I get back for this tenant is not the best. And I apologize, but I can't show you customer data, as I'm sure you can understand. Dragging over Power BI desktop. So if you've ever taken a collection of files in, and basically said, okay, combine, I take these files here and I hit the combine button and it creates all this stuff here to transform it. It'll do that with JSON files as if they're text files, right? And so especially for the activity one, I really don't do too much more special than that to get, it dump it out into that data. And then I split off various pieces of it, to focus in on the particular information that I want. Because if we look at this here, here. Ah, come on. It's one silly file. You can start to get a sense. I'm going to show you on the reports too, but you can see what this stuff looks like, right? Here's the operation, the creation time, who did it, the IP they came from. There's the IPs coming through on that one. User agent, right? Was it browser? Was it something else? And this is all the activity data. Again, it'd be much cooler if I had better activity data, but hey. Really, this is what I wanted to show you on all the reports here. This is even just on this tenant where I can't even pull that much information. You can see the types of information you can start tracking, right? Who created this data set and when, right? Oh, it was created April 29th. This person created it. This is the name, etc. Right? So kind of interesting. These all are going to look very unimpressive because there's just not a lot here. But maybe even from the headers, you can get the sense that I can go across my entire workspace and see what report is the most popular, right? Who's looking at the most used report? What's the most used app, etc. I can look at users, who's permissioned where, etc. Who's using premium, etc. Me just.
So good information. Yeah, like you said, it's harder when you're not seeing a very active tenant. Amin does have his hand up.
Yep.
Is it a good spot to take a question?
Sure.
Okay, the most recent question I had is you have all this Power Query where you bring this stuff in, and you showed it's not a whole lot, but it is something you would do repeatedly. So if you have to do this for different clients, do you take your Power BI file and then just copy it, make a copy of it, or do you somehow, how do you reuse the Power Query? Do you just copy the file? What do you do?
I just use
read
parameters. So there's an audit. So this is the audit one. So it's a single file, right? But it's parameterized so that it will look for this file. And then I just change that for whatever customer.
Okay.
Right. So if I've had the customer dump out the JSON file, I go in and I use the parameter. On the activity one, it's a folder parameter, but it's the same concept, right?
Okay.
So what you're looking at here, I actually took a customer one, changed this parameter to point to that sample data, loaded it up, took their name off the report, and that. So that's how I handle that. Again, I kind of have a part 2 that is in the mix on this. And again, I've kind of hinted around that Microsoft's coming out with some stuff around this area. So I will have more to present at some point. But this particular report looks a little better, I think, because it's got more data in it. But you could start doing things by like filtering by, here's my old company, Blue Granite. They got one workspace here. Blue Granite was bought by 3Cloud. That's how I ended up at 3Cloud. But and we're data people, right? If you're working with Power BI, you're a data person. And I will say that this is not how I would ever do this. This is not we don't have a star schema here, right? it's broken out somewhat, but it's not really a star schema. Kind of played around with building a better one, but you could do that as you wish. But really, I just wanted to introduce you to the cool stuff that's there, right? I mean, here's all my workspaces and users and what access level they have, right? There's actually a field that's not in here, but it's in the data that did they get assigned to the workspace individually or by group, right? That's real important to one of my customers because they want everybody assigned by group, not by name. And you can just go down the line on each one of these and look. Again, it's kind of crap, sorry. But I've got, let's see if I have any data here. Yeah, so this data set, here's the Power Query for it. And this could be useful if you're trying to, track down across your environment, who's using this damn spreadsheet, right? Who is using this rogue spreadsheet that somebody built? I need to find all the data sets that have it. Here's columns, measures, right? We talked about the DAX. Who's out there writing DAX sometimes would be interesting to know. And what kind of DAX are they writing? Are they following best practices, et cetera, right? And this goes all the way through. Yes, data flows are included. There's data flow metadata there. The refresh information is handled separately. It's not in this, but hopefully that gives you a sense. I don't think I really have much left on my deck. Yeah, that's pretty much what I wanted to cover. I wish I had a little more time to go a little more deeper, but I think this is a good stopping point. Again, the point is to expose you to this. I'll give you these scripts. I'm easily accessible on LinkedIn. If you want to look me up and you have questions about the scripts. 3Cloud actually sells a solution that Blue Granite wrote that I talked about that pro version, tracking this over time. We wrote a solution that, gathers this stuff every day, parses it, shoots it into SQL, and then we have models built off of that for reporting. So you could easily see how that kind of stuff would be really interesting and important to track in your environment, to be able to see that activity data for the last 6 months. Holy crap, that report's not there anymore. When did it go away? 6 months ago, and this person deleted it, right? It's kind of mind-blowing for a Power BI admin to have that kind of information at your hands. So a lot of content. I'll let you full bore. Again, you can reach me on LinkedIn, and I'll be happy to answer questions. Amit, if you got more questions, hit me.
You mean can I ask you about the Winsboro Art and Wine Festival?
Sure.
Is that worth driving out to?
Yeah, it's pretty neat actually. I'm not a big wine drinker, but I know there's a lot of vineyards out here. And just to totally derail this away from Power BI, there was an old guy that used to write a column in the paper that claimed some French guys came out in World War II when Germany took over, and they brought some actual wine grape vines with them, and they planted them in the woods here, and they kept them growing the whole time during the war, and then took them back to France afterwards because the climate and the soil and everything around here is a pretty good match for some of that areas where they grow wine. So it's a fun festival. It's not DFW scale. It's a small town, but they usually have a lot of really cool art vendors and stuff like that, and lots of people walking around blitzed on wine. So we are lucky in that we have 2 really big lakes here, so we get a lot of wealthy lake people. So they do a lot with the arts in Winsboro, theater and art together. I would definitely say come out. Yeah.
That sounds great. Thank you.
Yep.
So Paul did put a question in the chat. Is the PBIX available, or are you going to be able to make that available as well, or is that's?
Yeah, sure, I can do that. Yep.
So Paul, we'll work it out to where watch Meetup. I'll try to post a message there if once we can figure out everywhere to host everything.
Yeah, and let me stop sharing too quickly. I will say that even the audit data is more complicated to process because it's nested JSON. So if you think about it, in a workspace, you have one-to-many data sets. Within those data sets, you have one-to-many reports. Within those reports, you have one-to-many users.
Mhm.
And the users could be at the report level, the data set level, workspace level. So it gets complicated real quick. In fact, when you pull the JSON in, this is what you get is this stuff where you've got a list here and you expand the list and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I'll include this because it wasn't easy and I don't even know if it's perfect the way I did it, but and then I broke out, you go into these and it breaks out by workspace and all that kind of stuff. So good question. And Kevin, please remind me to do that.
Yeah, will do.
Any other questions on deck?
No questions, just people saying good job, thank you.
Cool. Yeah,
Dan,
absolutely.
Unrelated question.
Uh-huh.
What kind of headset are you wearing?
What is this called? It's a bone conducting one.
Yeah, it sounds really good.
I think it's Shocks, like SHOKZ or something like that. I have another one that I use at the gym. I actually have lost some hearing in some of my ears, so the idea with these bone conduction ones is you're supposed to be able to hear that, and then you can hear other stuff going on. I don't get that benefit, but they're real good. I like them. I do say if you get this one, there's an extra USB that you need to buy to make it so that it works with Teams seamlessly. But man, it's great. I walk around the house and just forget I'm wearing the thing.
And
Very light.
It's Bluetooth and the battery lasts a good long time.
Yeah, I mean, I've never had to go out in a day. I mean, I've never pushed